I think almost all degrees, whether it be a MA or PhD, almost all degrees in creative writing involve some kind of what you might call loosely supplementary discourse, a reflective commentary, a reflective essay, a critical commentary, has all sorts of different names across the sector. And they often, as you say, they form part of the assessment. There's the creative writing, which is the big thing, but they're often kind of part of the assessment. And sometimes they consist of something like an essay in which you talk about your research, you contextualize your work, you talk about your process in writing it. And I think if they're done well, then they are really useful. And I think they're there for two reasons. Firstly, because if you're doing a creative writing degree at university, it's an academic course. So that's the academic context. It caters for that kind of academic context. In a way, it's one of the things that differentiates it from doing, say, an evening class. Secondly, it's kind of linked to what I was saying earlier about that at university, you learn by the idea is that you learn to be a better writer by reflecting on what you're doing, by analysing what you're doing, and critiquing yourself, thinking about your own process, but also kind of contextualising what you're doing. So saying, look, I've written this ghost story. I've read these other ghost stories which helped in my process, in my practice. I've read these books on theory, which theory of short stories or whatever, which have helped in my practice. And in that way, that you learn by kind of, again, the learning process, that you learn by a process of reflection and then trying again and then reflecting again and so on and so forth. And that they're kind of, in that way, staging posts where you say, this is where I am now. This is what I think. At the moment, this is my practice at the moment, and this is where I might go, and so on and so forth. It's a kind of idea that you learn by doing, because that's part of creative writing, is you actually do the creative writing, you learn by doing, but you also learn then by reflecting on what you're doing. Maybe it's as simple as that.
One of the most beneficial activities for me when I did the MA was a critical commentary, but I was critiquing the poetry of someone else in my class. And their particular poetry was not the kind of stuff that I write. It was very landscapey, and I'm more of a spoken word type poet. And so it stretched me so hard, but it was one of my best grades because I worked so hard to dissect this person's poetry and try and work out what this meant and what that meant and how they could have done things better. And yeah, I don't think I realized at the time how useful that activity was to really dissect it, because I don't think if I'd delivered the feedback in class and just been kind of presented it there and then, as is often the case, I could have gone into that much depth and really taken the time to think about it and pick it apart.
From my point of view, I think you learn so much more by giving in-depth critiques to other writers than you do by just writing on your own. But actually, I learned so much in the first few years of teaching creative writing about my own kind of aesthetic and critical standards by having to kind of talk about other people's work. And as you say, especially other people's work that is totally different to your own. Because then you have to kind of think, okay, I have these aesthetic criteria that I bring to bear on my own work, but how do they relate to this, which is totally different? If I think good writing includes some of these elements, and yet this person's doing something totally different, why are they doing it differently? Does that mean that their writing is worse or better? So actually that kind of pushing yourself to read other people's works, I don't think there's anything more beneficial to a writer, really.
Yeah, it's giving feedback to other people, which makes me realize how much I know and how much I've grown, even if I'm uncomfortable giving feedback to other people.
Absolutely.